Hey, what's up, everyone? Nick Yuskevich back again. It is week 9 of this NFL season. Going to do the usual, where I'm going to give out a play here at each position here for GPPs for this NFL slate. And so, very interesting week here. We've got a lot of news. A couple trades that just happened, definitely fantasy related with J.A. and Kelvin Benjamin have been traded. Ezekiel Elliott obviously suspended for 6 games, we think, this time. And so just a lot of things happening, some bye weeks, certainly like that coming up here this week as well. So it's an interesting slate. So let's just get right on into it. So for quarterback position, there isn't really anything too, I think, sneaky good under the radar this week, unless it's just, someone piles up some garbage time or just gets the touchdown variance here. But I think this week I really like Dak Prescott. And I will admit, I'm probably, as much as anybody, have been really reluctant to kind of buy into Dak as like one of the top fantasy quarterbacks. It's just with Ezekiel Elliott there and the running game and everything like that. But I have to give Dallas credit because their offensive line really has improved over like the last month or so. Obviously, they had a little bit of a change up in their offensive line this year in comparison to last year, when last year their offensive line was pretty clearly, I think, the best, or at least arguably was one of the best, but I think probably the best. They had taken a little bit of a step back, I thought, to start this year with some of the changes, but they've actually really improved here, I think, over the last month, and Zeke was obviously running well. But now that Ezekiel Elliott is suspended a little bit, that probably means Dallas might end up throwing here a little bit more in this contest, especially in a game where they're going up against a Kansas City offense that will certainly be scoring some points against Dallas's weak defense. So this is a game that has shootout kind of written all over it to me. I believe the line currently right now, it's a pick 'em right now with an over-under of 51. So both teams project to score about 25, 26 points or so. But the other also thing I really like about this, and I just don't think a lot of people are really recognizing this yet, but Kansas City's defense just really isn't very good. If you take a look here at the NFL stats sheet that I use, if you take a look at Kansas City here, they are 30th in defensive yards per play. They're giving up 6 yards per play. They are 29th against the run and 25th against the pass. So they're bad in both categories. And so I really like that, certainly for a spot here where, like I said, Zeke's not going to be there this week. And it's the sportsbook projection says it's going to be a high-scoring game. Dak's obviously been playing well. He might actually even run it a little bit more himself in the red zone. You never know, which would obviously be a good thing for the upside in the rushing TDs. So definitely like this spot for Dak Prescott. And there's some, and I don't think his ownership will really be that bad, just because like Carson Wentz will be, or excuse me, not Carson Wentz. He's got Denver this week. Sorry, that's not a good example, but he's got Drew Brees is kind of priced up there around the same level, going up against a weak Tampa defense at home, so I'm sure Breeze will be owned quite a bit. There's some other guys. Deshaun Watson's obviously drawing Indianapolis. His price is pretty expensive. But anyways, I just don't think Dak's ownership will be too bad. So it'll be a good spot to use him. And actually, the last thing I'll just touch up on quarterbacks is, Max has been probably driving this more than I have, and I haven't quite fully bought into it. But I'm starting to buy into it a little bit more, just how often the winning lineup in these GPPs, the bigger ones, they're often going to have like one of the top tier quarterbacks. It won't be that way all the time, but it's going to be that way a vast majority of the time. And Dak Prescott, clearly one of those guys here this year. And actually, if you take a look here at this is just fantasy points per game on the year. And everything like that. So this is a ranked. This is just quarterbacks here at the top, but this is it's just ranked by fantasy points per game this year. DraftKings are here on the left, FanDuel here on the right. Dak Prescott's been the 4th best quarterback in fantasy points per game this year, and actually I think he was number 1 or number 2 before that shootout between Houston and Seattle. So Dak actually has been pretty much the best quarterback, or one of the best quarterbacks at least each week. So and even a better reason to use him here. So anyways, so that does it for quarterback. On to running back. There's a couple guys I'm going to talk about here. First one is Christian McCaffrey. And so I know the usage for McCaffrey still at the running back spot is not ideal. But at the same time here, I take a look at this and seeing that Kelvin Benjamin has been traded. As we know, I know Devin Funchess has stepped up, obviously, this year. He's certainly developing and found his role in the offense. But But before he had stepped up, there really wasn't anybody in this Carolina offense that was able to be a second pass-catching option to Kelvin Benjamin. Obviously, Greg Olsen is, but Greg Olsen is still out injured, obviously, at the tight end spot. So for right now, I just don't, some teams I can see there's certain guys I like to keep tabs on. If this guy's usage just goes up, I really like his spot in this role for this offense. I don't see that for Carolina here for a really good number 2 pass-catching option from a wide receiver standpoint, at least. So I think Christian McCaffrey could get targeted a lot in this contest this week. They're playing the Falcons. And the Atlanta Falcons are obviously a very good offense. Their defense is actually better than you might think. They're 10th in defensive yards per play, and they're actually 9th against the pass, which is pretty solid. But Atlanta is usually really bad at defending against tight ends and running backs, actually. And so they're probably a little bit better of a matchup in the wide receiver department. Or Atlanta will be better off defensively in the defending wide receivers, but not quite as much to running backs and tight ends, I don't think. And McCaffrey will line up, and they'll get him and mix him and match him in certain ways. I'm sure they'll draw the usual, they'll try and get him in the usual creative spots, Carolina, that is. So I think McCaffrey's targets and overall production should be going up this week without Kelvin Benjamin, and especially in a game that'll probably be a little bit more of an offensive type of game against Atlanta. And so I do like McCaffrey there. He's obviously pretty cheap, and isn't coming off like a massive game here the last couple of weeks, which is kind of nice. So his ownership I still think be kind of on the lower side here. The other guy I just want to mention is DeMarco Murray, priced pretty fairly this week. And then if you take a look at the Baltimore Ravens defensively, yes, they are 7th in yards per play, but they're actually 22nd against the run and 5th versus the pass. So definitely, if you're playing Baltimore, it's definitely better to go with the running game than the passing game. We obviously know that Baltimore's offense is kind of a mess. Tennessee right now is favored. The line is up in certain sports books. It's down in certain others. But it does look like Joe Flacco is going to play. And so Tennessee is only being listed right now as like a 3.5, 4-point favorite if Flacco does, assuming Joe Flacco does play, which I actually think that line's a little short. I think it should be more like 5.5 to 6 for how bad this Baltimore offense has been. I think that Miami game from last Thursday night is incredibly misleading. Baltimore scored a lot on defense in that matchup. Their 40 points was only on I have to go back and check, but it wasn't on a ton of offensive production, and it was against Miami's defense at the same time. So I think this is a game that certainly favors Tennessee at home and everything like that. So, and I like DeMarco here for this spot. So moving on to wide receiver. So wide receiver, this is a spot I really like here for this guy. So for a lot of these cheaper wideouts, there are a lot of people on the table here. We're going to have a lot of people obviously using Devin Funchess, certainly because Kelvin Benjamin was traded this week. That his ownership will be through the roof. There are other really good cheap wide receiver options like Mohamed Sanu, I'm sure is usually been doing very well and is still priced pretty darn cheaply. There are some other guys in there as well that I know will draw a lot of attention. But in any case, I think one guy that's going to slip through the cracks here who could get a ton of volume is Sterling Shepard. The Giants' passing offense obviously hasn't been that great, but remember, since all those Giants injuries happened, Sterling Shepard was injured for one of the games, and then the other game, they were drawing the Broncos defense, which is obviously one of the best pass defenses there is in Denver as well. And so that just none of that is good, obviously, if you're trying to put up passing production. So now Sterling Shepard, it looks like he's going to be back this week, and he's clearly the best wide receiver on this team. Evan Ingram's he's listed as tight end, but he's one half tight end, one half wide receiver if you watch him play. But Sterling Shepard obviously knows the offense very well, and Eli Manning's still throwing him the ball, which is better than the backup or whatever the backup is going to be, no matter who it is. And so in any case, I think Sterling Shepard will easily see double-digit targets this week, and I wouldn't surprise me if he caught 10 balls for 90 yards type of a thing and everything like that. So whatever it might be, but his volume should be very high in this spot against an LA Rams defense that's just kind of okay. They're average against the pass. They're pretty bad against the run, but the Giants can't run, as we all know. So the Giants will be throwing quite a bit. They have one of the highest pass percentages in the league. I'll just double check it to make sure see where it's at right now. Yeah, they're number 4 in pass percentage. So the Giants are definitely still throwing the ball quite a bit. So nice spot for Sterling Shepard with just so few options to catch the ball, and they finally have a better matchup and kind of a little bit of a better situation going up against the Rams. And so, in any case, moving on to tight end. This is a good spot for Jack Doyle. Jack Doyle, right now, believe it or not, if we take a look at tight ends here in the fantasy points per game department, scroll all the way down to tight end, if I could slow down the scroll. Okay, here we go. Jack Doyle, he is 5th in fantasy points per game on both websites. He's definitely much better in DraftKings right here. This is Jack Doyle at the 5th spot. 13.26 on DraftKings, 9.54 on FanDuel. You can see there's a little bit more of a drop-off here on FanDuel here, kind of from this top 4 tier a little bit. So, but that makes a little bit of sense, that makes some sense just because Jack Doyle's only caught 2 touchdowns on the year. The Colts offense obviously hasn't been that great this year for obvious reasons. And so they're going up against a Houston team, actually, that is pretty bad against tight ends this year. Indianapolis Colts, this is fantasy points per game. The Indianapolis Colts, or excuse me, we're looking for the Houston Texans because that's who they're playing. Yeah, right here. They are 27th against tight ends. Houston's really bad against tight ends from a fantasy points per game perspective. So kind of a nice spot for Jack Doyle. I will just say this, Zach Ertz is easily the best tight end this week, in my opinion. Obviously, when you're going up against and they're going up against Denver, I understand you think they're a really good pass defense. Denver's actually 30th against tight ends. You saw Travis Kelce kill it for the Chiefs on Monday Night Football just earlier this week. The Broncos are really good against the pass from the wide receiver standpoint, but they are really not good against tight ends in the way they match up. So I would take a look at, obviously, Zach Ertz is the best tight end this week. There's no doubt in my mind about that. Travis Kelce's good, too, obviously, against Dallas, but I like Ertz the most. But from a GPP standpoint, you want somebody that's going to be a little bit, probably lower ownership. Won't be incredibly low, but it'll be lower than those guys. Jack Doyle's your guy, I think, in a nice spot there. And the Colts are going to be throwing a lot because they're going to be playing from behind against Houston, and so all better there, too, as well. So for defense, a lot of people are going to be using the top few defenses. This is another one of those weeks where we're going to see a lot of people use, like the Texans against the Colts. They're going to use the Philadelphia Eagles because of how turnover prone the Broncos have been. The Eagles are at home as well. A lot of people use the Jacksonville Jaguars going up against the Bengals. The Jaguars have really had a few just monstrous games this year, of course, but there are 2 defenses I'm going to give you here that I actually think are sneaky good. One I like a little more than the other. One is going to sound a little bit more like a home run or Hail Mary toss, whatever you want to call it. But hear me out on these 2. The first one is actually the Bengals, who are playing the Jaguars. That is an over-under of 39. The line is priced right now Jacksonville by 4.5. So I think that line's a little high, personally. I think it should be more like 3, maybe even 2.5. Part of the reason is most sportsbook odds makers do not give Jacksonville much. Some don't even give them a home field edge, period. Some will give them like a 1 or 1.5 point home field edge. Because when the odds makers are making lines, it's not like they're giving 3 to everybody. That's kind of the average. Some people are going to give 4, some people are going to give 2 or 1.5. Jacksonville is one of the worst home field advantages this year, or it has been in several years. They have been for quite a while. They're kind of right there with the Chargers this year, at least from a Chargers standpoint. But in any case, so that line's a little high to me. And I don't think Jacksonville's 4.5 points better than Cincinnati. I think the line's been a little bit inflated with Jacksonville in certain spots because their defense has teed off on so many bad offenses in certain spots, like against the Colts last week. They did it to the Ravens in London in Week 3. They did it to the Tom Savage Texans in Week 1. So like that. And actually, even in their game at Pittsburgh, like Pittsburgh put up a lot of yards against them. It was just the interceptions that really doomed Pittsburgh in that game. So anyways, I'm not really buying that line so much. I am buying a very low scoring game though. And so I think Jacksonville's offense is certainly one that can still be very turnover prone with Blake Bortles at quarterback. Certainly, and so and the Bengals defense has been very good this year. They're actually, I think they're top 10 in sacks this year. They're about that. Actually, you know what? I'll just double check that right now, so I'm not making something up. They are tied for 9th in sacks. Okay, so that's a good thing for Cincinnati if they have a pass rush, and if Cincinnati does build a little bit of a lead here, that would which should I think be a tight ball game and a low scoring game. Jacksonville might need to throw it a little bit more. Maybe Leonard Fournette's not 100% healthy, and they're going to rush him back a little bit on the early side. We'll see. So I think that's a nice little GPP option. And then the second one, this is a game that probably nobody's going to watch unless it's coming up on Red Zone or you're a fan of one of these teams, but I actually like the San Francisco defense this week. remember in the midst of all the stuff that's been going on in the NFL in the last week or two, Carson Palmer's not playing. So right now, that's a very good sign, obviously, for an Arizona Cardinals team that's going to be probably even worse moving the football right now. So no Carson Palmer, no David Johnson. It's not a good situation for an Arizona offense that's was already struggling as it was. And if you take a look at this from a sack standpoint, San Francisco's middle of the road. They're tied for 15th in generating sacks this year. But Arizona's allowed the 7th most, and that number's only going to improve, or that number, excuse me, is only going to get worse for Arizona, and it's only a better spot for San Francisco. The 49ers are at home. The over-under is a 39.5. The Cardinals are only favored by 2. And so this is a nice little spot here, I think, for San Fran. Look, if you're making... This is more of a thing if you're going to be making like a ton of lineups, like if you're making multiple lineups, like San Francisco's defense is going to be 1-2% at the absolute most. Like you don't have to like commit much ownership to have like a good share of San Francisco defense. I'm not saying to go all out by any means of the imagination on either of these defenses, but these are two defenses I would consider pivoting to. If you were obviously looking to spread out some ownership and try to maybe like fade one of the top defenses and try and go that route, those are a couple little pivots I like as some very low ownerships here this week. Cincy will be on a little more than San Fran certainly, but they'll be on the lower side certainly. So in any case, that's it for this week. Sorry, I know I was talking pretty quick there to wrap this up. So thank you for watching. As usual, I'm at Nicky Skevich on Twitter. DailyFantasyWinners is on Twitter at DFSnerd. And if you like these videos, as usual, please remember to like them and subscribe to the YouTube channel. All right, good luck, everyone.